Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for June 10th, 2024. Today is the anniversary of what's called the John F. Kennedy Peace Speech, which was a potential turning point in the Cold War and paved the way for improvements of relationships between the United States and the Soviet Union. And I'll have more on that later in this report. But let me begin with a couple of developments, some headlines. First, there's a shock that was delivered in Europe yesterday, delivered by the people, the voters. In France and Germany, the vote was decidedly against the war in Ukraine and against the governments pursuing that war. In Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland, which has been under attack by the German government as a pro-Putin party, because of its opposition to the war and its opposition to the green policy, they came in second in the European parliamentary race. And the Greens, the Scholz party, the SPD, and the FDP, the coalition parties, fell to a very low total of around 30%. So that means there's going to be a change coming in Germany. Whether it happens immediately or not depends on how aggressively people insist on a change. In France, the war hawk Macron was crushed. Marine Le Pen's party got twice the votes of Macron. In response, Macron called for a new election for the National Assembly. Can he pull together his war party by then? Probably not. What this means is that the pro-war faction got hit really hard in the elections in Europe, and we'll have more on this in the coming days. Secondly, the resignation of Benny Gantz from the Israeli War Cabinet was not a shock, but does represent a move against Netanyahu. The problem, and keep this in mind, is that Gantz is for the war. He's saying that Netanyahu is not doing the right job in ensuring that the hostages get freed and that Hamas is destroyed. But it does reflect the opposition growing to Netanyahu and portends something kind of for the future. But until the United States insists that Israel stop the genocide, nothing will change there. In fact, over the weekend, there was a rescue operation of 4 hostages, which resulted in more than 250 deaths in Gaza. That is, the Israeli Defense Forces bombed civilian areas to create a diversion so forces could go in and free the hostages. This was celebrated in Israel, but it leaves behind the reminder how many Palestinians have to be killed for each Israeli. And this is only going to increase the isolation of Israel among the other governments in the world. Now, on the increased isolation, let's look at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where more than 130 nations came together to engage in discussion of war and peace and economic development. The most important takeaway is that there were many discussions involving the BRICS. Can there be a new monetary system, a new development system, a new trading system outside of the dollar? And this is where there was significant agreement, a lot of discussion leading toward the BRICS summit coming up in October. But the fact that you had so many governments there, so many private businesses there to discuss this and to participate in a movement to create an alternative to the collapsing dollar system in itself is an indication that the line that Putin is isolated is false. In fact, Putin was at the center of this discussion, and what was isolated was Joe Biden and the American War Party. So with these 3 headlines, let me get to the story on Kennedy's speech 61 years ago at American University. Because the topic he took up was, how do you get to peace? This speech months after the resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which could have led to nuclear war except for the back-channel discussions and the courage of John F. Kennedy in standing up to the war hawks in his cabinet and in the Congress. And within months of the settlement of the Cuban Missile Crisis, he gave a speech at American University where he laid out a path toward peace and what should be done. And I'm going to read some quotes from that because I think it's important for people to hear the words of President Kennedy in specific in addressing this situation. Kennedy started by saying, "What kind of peace do I mean? What kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. And not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time." Kennedy went on to talk about peace more specifically. First, he said, "Let us examine our attitude toward peace itself. Too many of us think peace is impossible. Too many think it's unreal. But that is a dangerous defeatist belief. It leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. We need not accept that view," he said. "Our problems are man-made. Therefore, they can be solved by man. And man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again." Now, he then went on to talk about the specifics of achieving peace with Russia, at that time the Soviet Union. And he said, "No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue." And here he's talking about something crucial, the idea of having empathy for the people of other nations, to be able to treat them as you'd wish that they would treat you. He goes on and says, "As Americans, we find communism profoundly repugnant as a negation of personal freedom and dignity. But we can still hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economic and industrial growth, in culture and in acts of courage." And this is in contrast to Biden at Normandy demeaning the Soviet effort in defeating the Nazis in World War II. And so Kennedy went on to this conclusion of the first section of the speech. He said, "So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and to the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future. And we are all mortal." Now, with these words, Kennedy was sending a message to the American people and to the world that there were changes coming between U.S.-Soviet relations, that the war threat between them was going to be ended by discussion, by negotiation. Back channels were set up. The limited test ban treaty passed, and a policy of détente was in the offing. The problem is that Kennedy was assassinated, that this was a threat to the war party then, just as the idea of a negotiated peace over Ukraine today is a threat to the war party. And therefore, there's a big push for continued wars. The unipolar order is collapsing. The empire is dying. So what's their reaction to that? Work with other nations to build a system that's more fair and equitable? No, of course not. We must defend the unipolar order. And that's why we have a war danger now. And that was something that Putin addressed at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. He said that Russia has no intention of using nuclear weapons, except in the case where its security as a nation is threatened, including the danger of a nuclear strike preceded by attacks on Russia's early warning system. So we've already seen the West moving in that direction and sending more arms into Ukraine for that purpose. But at the same time, what Putin is saying to the United States is we can work with you. We can work together for the development not just of Eurasia, but for the development of Africa, the development of Asia. And that's why so many nations came to this conference. And that's why so many nations are supporting Russia in the attempt to stop the killing that's going on in Ukraine. Killing that's caused by NATO's commitment to continue the war because they wish to weaken Russia. So Russia will not play a role in creating this new economic order. So toward the end of the Kennedy vision of peace, that is the idea that nations can solve problems and work together, we will have on Wednesday at 12 p.m. a press conference at the National Press Club. There's a link to it in the description section. The title is "The Danger of Nuclear War is Real and Must Be Stopped." And I'm sorry, it's at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, not 12. 12 Central, 1 p.m. Eastern. Speakers will include Scott Ritter, whose attempt to attend the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum was stopped by the State Department in another action of censorship. Colonel Richard Black, the former head of the Judge Advocate General Corps in the Pentagon, will be speaking. Ray McGovern, a veteran of 27 years as a CIA analyst and a peace activist, will speak, and also Helga Zepp-LaRouche. So the link to that will be in the description section of today's update. The question of war and peace, as Kennedy said, is up to the people. It's possible to achieve peace based on mutual benefit for nations where people have common interest. If you want that, join the Schiller Institute. That's the way we can achieve something outside the control of the war party, which otherwise is committed to continued killing and destruction. So thanks for joining me today. See you tomorrow.